Good evening, everyone, and thank you for all joining us this evening. My name is Rachita Gupta, and I'm Projects Manager at Ark. I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation between Gulammohammed Sheikh and Gitanjali Dang as part of our exhibition In the Light of. Gitanjali is an independent writer, curator, and founder of the Arts Lab Khana Badosh. Sheikh sir, of course, needs no introduction as one of the stalwarts of Indian art, a cherished member of the art community in Baroda, and someone we have the privilege of considering a mentor and friend. Before I hand over the floor to Gitanjali and Sheikh sir, I would like to take a minute to share a quick note on the gallery and our current exhibition for the new members in our audience. Gallery Ark was set up in 2017 with the intention to platform and champion the strong heritage of arts and culture in Baroda. Recently, we have developed an exciting program of pedagogy and accessibility in addition to the exhibitions program. Through our work, we endeavor to pay homage to the stalwarts from the Baroda school while also creating conversations around contemporary art in Baroda and beyond. In the Light of is perhaps our most ambitious exhibition yet. 2 years in the making and a pandemic in the mix. Bringing the show together was challenging to say the least, but entirely worthwhile in the end. For this, I would like to thank Gitanjali for her meticulous attention and commitment, and of course, all the participating artists for their support and faith through this journey. I would also like to share that we've extended the dates of the exhibition, which will now be on view at Gallery Ark in Baroda till 15th of May. I do hope some of you can visit us in person, COVID permitting. On that note, I'm going to hand over the floor to Gitanjali to kick off the main event. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Gulam, do you also want to appear on the screen? Okay, maybe I'll just begin with the. Hey, everyone. Good to have you join us on a Sunday evening for the second happening of episode 5. And it's a big one too for us. We have with us in the house today Gulammohammed Sheikh, who is here but is not on the screen somehow.
I have already put it on screen.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Gulam. How are you this evening?
Okay, not bad.
Okay, so just a few quick things to know more about the happenings, the ones that have happened and those that are yet to happen. I request you to visit our exhibition website inthelightof.com. What we'll do, how this will flow is that we will show you the exhibition video just now, and then Gulam and I will have the conversation. The exhibition video would also be an interesting place to begin, because what has happened now is that Gulam paid us a surprise visit some last week when we were having a virtual walkthrough. And so he has already taken us through the Fatehpur and Chandigarh series as part of that walkthrough. And so in addition to the video, should anyone need more context to that, then you can always refer to the video from last week. Okay. Rachita, do you want to just mute us? Gulam, maybe you could switch off your camera while we see the video, and then we can reappear again once the video is done. Hi. So one of the reasons I was excited at the prospect of working with the exhibition premise that hopefully you've had the chance to read a bit as part of the video. The exhibition premise that has since become in the light of had certainly to do with the fact that it would set up the context for interacting with Gulam and Nasreen and certain stories that I had thus far not had the opportunity to engage or mingle with. The prospect of an intergenerational dialogue, if you will. Before this exhibition, Rachita, if you could please pull up that photo. So before this exhibition, this situation here in the photograph had been the extent of my interaction with Gulam. Our paths had rarely, if ever, crossed. And when they did, they were at busy intersections like this one, where it wasn't really possible to give or take pause. But intergenerational dialogue, or I dare say friendship, could not be just had because I woke up to it one day. So as much as I would have liked to rush it, Gulam wouldn't let it be rushed, or Gulam wouldn't be rushed. That look of suspicion on Gulmam's face, it took quite a long time for it to ease out. I would definitely not go so far as to say that he's been won over just yet. Rachita, thanks. We can take it away now. But I'm really glad that the conversation we started in June of 2019 has come as far as it has. So a huge thanks for Gulam for joining us this evening. Another reason I got really excited at the prospect of this exhibition was because it would entail art history. I'm not an art historian, and this was never intended to be an art historical exhibition, and yet it is, although it really is not. The exhibition is focused on something that many might consider marginalia, and exactly this was of interest. An afternoon, four friends, Gulam, Nasreen, Nilima Sheikh, and Purushottam Dhumal spent at Fatehpur Sikri in the summer of 1970. Just another afternoon, it would seem, and it was, except it wasn't. Having said that, it was also with a sense of great relief that I did dive into art history for the purpose of this. Reading essays, looking through old exhibition catalogs, watching Gulam talk eloquently away on about his work on sort of innumerable YouTube videos, and trying to piece this puzzle together. Diving into art history felt a bit like swimming or floating in waters that were just the right temperature. A teeny tiny relief, it would seem, with all the storms raging about us. That is, however, not to say that art history is incapable of stirring up storms. As far as subjects or disciplines go, art history is as freighted and as complex as any other. Like Kavita Singh said in an interview, in our current political climate, art history is more important than ever before. And she adds, the erasure of the role of Mughals in Indian art history, for instance, means any sort of work in the area shines a light in a corner that some would rather was left unseen. About art history, Gulam. Hello.
Okay. Am I there?
Yes, yes. I can hear you, but I can't see you just yet.
Oh, okay.
So about art history, Gulam has said, every artist makes their own art history, which I do think is a most pithy thing to say. So Gulam, if you can tell us a bit about your art history, what to your mind is its place in the current context, and and maybe perhaps elaborate a bit on this idea of every artist makes their own art history.
It takes back about 50 odd years when I was doing my master's in fine arts. And the dean, Professor Bendre, asked me whether I would teach art history in place of Dr. Parimu, who was proceeding abroad. Well, it was a godsend opportunity for somebody who was a scholarship student. So I said, no, sir, it's wonderful, but how do I do it? I'm still studying. So he said, look, you can study in one class and you can teach in another. So that's how it happened. So before beginning my class, I went to the library, one of the finest libraries, perhaps in the country at that time, and continued to be so for a long time. And I looked at all art history books, as many that were available. I looked at the books of history as well. And when I looked at the books on art history, there is one by History of Western Art by Christensen. By the way, Johnson's book had not yet arrived on the market. Johnson's arrived a little later. But most of the books that I saw were books on Western art. Yep. Eventually, when I found a book on quote unquote world art, yep, I found that Indian art was relegated to, sort of using your term, a marginal status. Somewhere in the corner, not even 5% of the book. It was also Asian would be about 7%. Central and South American would be about 2%. But most of it beginning from, let's say, Altamira till the present day. And there would be no contemporary art in Asia, as though it didn't exist. Mm. Now, in a way, although I was a newcomer, it was an eye-opener. But when I had to teach, so one of the subjects that was given to me was called Story of Art. And I said, yes, that's a good idea. I'll teach whole history of art. And I read it all. And I started the story right from the beginning. And brought all the illustrations which were collected by Dr. Parimu and others. And right from, prehistoric time to Egyptian to Mesopotamian to Greek and Roman to Byzantine and medieval and Romanesque and Gothic and whatnot. I got familiar with all these things by looking at these illustrations. And these illustrations also entranced me to such an extent that I thought that it would be worthwhile to bring them to the class. And I used to bring them to the class and speak about them. But what I found in my class, there were students coming from all kinds of backgrounds. For instance, there was Vivan Sundaram, who had studied in the, the elite school in, where was it, I don't remember. Anyway, there were students who had studied in Bombay or somewhere else. There were those who had studied in Ahmedabad. But there were also students who came from tribal Gujarat. A Rathwa boy or somebody else, who came from a village in Saurashtra, like I did. I did come from a village, a small town, but somebody. Now, how would I address this art history to such a diverse group of people, to students? And tell you, first I spoke in English, but I found that there were many who couldn't understand, so I spoke in Hindi. And then later on, I even conducted a special class in Gujarati. So I literally ended up giving the same lecture 3 times. because we had the degree and diploma students did not do English. So I had to speak the language they could understand. Now, the question that arises that emerged right at the beginning, that first I thought that what I could do is to ask them all to copy from whatever period of art, the illustration that they choose. And I asked them to take them home. In those days, it was possible. There was no time for registration and all such things. They came back with their own copies. And when I saw that what did they choose? Somebody like Viman Sundaram chose Jackson Pollock. Somebody from, some other school chose Mona Lisa. Somebody chose Byzantine mosaic. Somebody chose, etc., etc. And I was I didn't know what to say, what to do. And I said, look, how do I teach as to all these people who see differently a singular artist? Then later on, when I asked somebody to copy, 5 students to copy Mona Lisa, each Mona Lisa was different from the other. Something of a kind of even 5% of Gujarati attitude appeared in that Mona Lisa. Somebody, who knew it very well, made it into like a British image. Somebody made it look like something else. And that is the point that the question arose, that there has to be an artistry for each one of them. And each one of them have to then construe and concoct an artistry. So with their illustration at the end of the year, we put them together, and I said that you now from your copies make the history that you have learned. And they all got together, they chose their things and they put it together. But in the end, it came out that, look, I see it like this, I see it like this. And I was quite fascinated. That association remained with me for a very long time. So when I say that at a later stage, perhaps in a conversation with John Clark or somebody, I said that, look, how can there be a singular artistry? That we all construct our own artistry. We have to make an artistry of our own. How do we do it? And since we have been kind of subject to this kind of a dominance of the Western way of thinking and Western art, how do we wriggle out of that? In what way do we see ourselves? Is it possible for us to, let us say, see world art from a vantage point of sitting in Baroda or somewhere in Anand or somewhere in Delhi or Dehradun? Or how do we look at it? So in a sense, artistry did fascinate me. And I thought that I would go on unraveling it as much as possible. And those 3 years were, in fact, a learning experience for me before I embarked upon a tour of, or rather I got a scholarship to go abroad in England. And in a way, my quest continues there.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm always amazed at the eloquence with which you can recall the past and the great storytelling, which brings me actually to the next to my next sort of prompt or question. I remember on July 8, 2019 was the day we first met in your studio in Baroda, and unprompted by me, you said you spoke on the subject of memory, and you said, I quote, "No memory is complete. Memory has no edges. It is not like a photograph. It undergoes change when you think of it, and it is transformed each time you think of it. Every time you think of it, you are also changing it, flickering all the time. Memory changes because of time and because the mind works on it. Memory also allows you to create memory." I don't remember this from memory.
Correct. You have taken it absolutely correctly.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't remember this from my memory. I remember it because I took it all down on my phone.
I'm very impressed.
So, I mean,
Your memory.
tell me about your relationship with memory, physiologically, philosophically speaking, and how has it evolved over the years?
So I think we live with memory right from our childhood till the time of wherever we are. And memory doesn't leave you because it's always it surrounds you. Sometimes it enters into not only your mind, but also your blood system. Sometimes it guides you, sometimes it indicates, directs you, makes you go somewhere, where you either have been or perhaps you have wanted to be, or something, that perhaps you have never ever been. So what is it that it does to you? It is something, which it's a kind of a second self. Am I used that word? Within the self itself, there are multiple selves. Among this, memory is a major, most powerful, and most intriguing self. So you keep returning to it all the time. And it leaves you again with multiple questions. And you keep asking those questions as to, did this ever happen? Did this happen? If it happened, how did it happen? Do I remember? And you know that all of us sort of remember something, but at the same time, we also reconstruct. And we end up, in fact, creating a kind of a group of memories into a kind of a singular bunch or a bundle, which you harbor somewhere. And that anytime that you wish to return, or anytime you wish to touch upon, you unravel, you open that bundle, and you see that they are there. So many of them. But most of them seem to have changed. It's like people, it's like animals, it's like organisms. They take their own shape. They sometimes they change right in front of you, before you even acknowledge them. And these are the cells of memories, I would like to call them. These cells remain within your, I would say, both body as well as mental self. And they literally, in some way provide you with what you call life. Am I making some sense?
Yes, of course. I mean, the landscape of memory is constantly sort of changing, even in a sense of the developments that happened around it. I recently, or not too recently, read that they have managed now to plant a memory. I mean, the sort of in a snail. So basically, a memory that the snail did not have, and this is the first sort of memory transplant that has ever happened. So there's some of the developments on memory. You were born and grew up in Surendranagar, Saurashtra,
Yeah.
where various streams of Kabir Panth are active as an oral tradition. Would it be safe to assume that in Kabir Dohas you encountered some of your earliest poetry? And could you tell us a bit about the place of Kabir in your life and work?
Now I must make a correction here. Kabir did not appear in my work and thought until I was about 50 or 60.
Okay.
Let me make it clear that in my childhood, Kabir did not figure.
Okay.
It's not that there was no Kabir poetry as it was in some of my textbooks, especially the Hindi textbook, because in Gujarati textbook, we do not have Kabir. Although Kabir is found to be, as the scholars say now, that there is a great Kabir tradition within Gujarat, as there is in many parts of India.
Yeah.
But Kabir as a poet did not figure in my textbook. Mira figured, because Mira wrote in a language which is sort of a Marwari, which comes very close to Gujarati. At times you can't even figure out the difference between the two. Mahane chakar rakho ji, मुझे अपना सर्वेंट बना लो. महाने मतलब हम गुजराती में बोलते हैं मने चाकर राखो, वहां पर बोलते हैं महाने, उतना ही फर्क है. But Kabir came to me because when I grew up a little older, came to my high school days, I started to study Hindi formally. I even gave an examination of the Vardha, whatever. There is that examination called Parichay and Pravesh, Parichay, COVID, etc. Sorry, COVID is a word which was used for a degree in those days. And I did up to Parichay, that means 3 examinations. And there I read Hindi, and Hindi was also one of the subjects taught in our school. And there you found Kabir. We were all struck by the dohas of Kabir, not me alone, because Kabir was all pervading. People would quote Kabir even in conversations. And I've seen it over the years that all over the country, I'm particularly the north of India, wherever you are, बड़ा हुआ तो क्या हुआ, जैसे पेड़ खजूर, पंछी को छाया नहीं, फल लागे अति दूर. What is so great about being big, that you have, it's like the palm tree, which doesn't give shade to the traveler, nor does it give the fruit. So you see, that was something which we encountered. But it took me a long time, rather many decades, before I came to Kabir again. And that was in the context of the communal background, communal kind of situations that I encountered. And I looked at Kabir again and again, and I found that there were many aspects of Kabir. Kabir is not one, by the way. Kabir wrote those very sarcastic, strong dohas, sometimes lashing out at the hypocrisy, which are current in the popular lingua, at the tongues of people. But Kabir also wrote a lot of what we call pad or bhajan, which are sung. So these are sung and these are conveyed in a different way. Then he also wrote poetry which was very esoteric. So if you were to take, a major book on Kabir poetry, you will find that there are many. And then there is the Eastern Kabir, and then there is the Western Kabir, and there are those who are in Banaras who find their own Kabir. So that Kabir came to me, in the context of what was happening in the country and also in Gujarat. I mean, I encountered communalism first in the 1969-70, the biggest riots in Gujarat. But I discovered Kabir about 20, 30 years later. It doesn't always coincide. It comes at a point you do not expect it to come, and it just emerges. And as I was reading poetry, and I began to, and so Kabir Rachanavali is something which I went through, and I found there are a number of things which I have, which I can, how shall I put it? That I can identify myself with. That is the same language, but it's very difficult to find that language today. To speak in that language and write poetry, as did Kabir. But I heard Kumar Gandharva singing Kabir, and it was absolutely so amazing that it transported you to another land. So I thought, well, if he can sing Kabir, I can paint Kabir. But what do I do? How do I do it? I had never painted any poetry until then, of the kind that I did when I painted images of Kabir. So I found an image of Kabir which I had actually got from a late Mughal 18th century painting in the collection of the British Museum or British Library. And I thought that this is worthwhile. Let me use this face. It was a very telling face. It was an image where Kabir is seated with two of his disciples, a boy and a girl, as you know, Kamal and Jamali. What is it? I think something like that. And I was quite struck by that image. So I enlarged that image. And I made that painting which you just showed before this, the blue one. And I thought, how do I bring Kabir in it? So I began to read his poems. And I found images, in his poetry, which I illustrated on the landscape of the face of Kabir. So these are all the images, not all, some of them are. No, they illustrate some. एक है ना फेमस जो कुमार गंधर्व ने नहीं मधुप मुदगल ने गाया है कबीर को कि मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नबी है. The pupil tells the guru, the teacher, that, oh, Guru, the prophet is in the pupil. How do you find? Prophet is nowhere else. It is in your own pupil. It is sitting there. And I thought there were such images which I could bring. And then I concocted similar images and I covered it on the face of Kabir. This is how I started my Kabir journey. And I ended up doing, I think, odd 20, 25 paintings of Kabir. This was an oil painting. But that is another one which might interest you because I mentioned something with regard to memory. Well, memory is not absolutely mental. I think it is also physical. Your body also knows and it remembers. Sometimes even the minutest of the sensation when it touches your skin and it begins to flicker, and you know that something had happened some 5, 10, 20, 25 years ago, where you were sitting in some odd place, somewhere watching sunset or sunshine, or you were traveling in a train. And that sensation takes you back to those journeys, which means that there is a kind of a physical, chemical relationship that memory has. And the chemicals move into your body. You know that we are all made of variety of chemicals, aren't we?
Yes, yes.
And these chemicals flow like blood, into our veins. But so Kabir, when he said that Ya Ghat Bhitar Sur Chand Hai, he said that in this very body is always compared to a pot. Ya ghat, ghat means pot. Ya ghat bhitar sur chand hai, ya ghat now lakhatara. It is this very pot in which are the sun and the star and the whatever, how many millions of stars. So in some way, Kabir also thinks physicality. He's not only sort of touching your mind, he touches your skin. It touches you. Poetry touches you in different ways. Poetry touches you sometimes on the soles of your feet. You realize that, somebody in the Veera Shaiva poetry had written about walking. And walking is about the feet that you go on walking, and your feet get so graced that you look at your body through the soles of your feet. How can this not happen? It does happen. So in a way, Kabir opened many a door, and I painted these odd paintings.
One of Kabir's, the subjects that he often touches upon, as in a great deal of his poetry addresses, is the subject of two subjects: subject of death and time. And I just wanted to quote from Linda Hess on the subject. And she writes, Kabir sometimes borrows the name of the Hindu god of death, Yama. More often, he uses the word Kal, which everyone understands as sort of a vague personification of death, but whose root meaning is time. The emphasis of time and death accounts for much of the urgency and intensity associated with Kabir. Like you spoke about the sort of urgency that his work has. It dramatizes not for the sake of drama, but because really each moment is life and death affair. This is a doha that she's translated. Keep remembering Ram. Death has you by the hair. He'll strike at home or in foreign lands. You never know when or where. Elsewhere in her essay, she writes, death is our reliable companion in Kabir. Since it is the one fact we absolutely don't want to face, it is the fact that he harps on about. So, Gulam, I mean, this is a sort of a preface to the question: what is your relationship with your own mortality, and how has that, if at all, changed this past year? How's your understanding of it changed this past year?
You have asked too many questions.
दो सवाल है.
चलो दो समझ लेते हैं. देखिए, the painting that you were showing, if you go back to it,
Rachita has
that painting is after a particular stanza of Kajar keri kotari. काजर का ही कोट. काजल बोलते हैं ना काले रंग का, कोठरी भी काले रंग की है, और जो किला है वो भी काले रंग का है. I won't go further, but what I'm trying to say is this, that it brings the image of the womb. That in a fort or a fortress in which where you sit, it's a dark chamber. Into that dark chamber, you are surrounded by a dark fort. And all through, you remain surrounded by that fort. That fort doesn't leave you, that coterie doesn't leave you. But Kabir sits in the middle of it and sings. So, in a way, Kal, as the word that Linda Hess has used, is a common term. It's a Sanskrit term. Kal means time. Basically, Kala Chakra. As you know, the circle of time. Kal can be used in many other ways, many other meanings. But Kal can also be, as we know that it is the question of time, but not only time alone. But Kal also envelops you. You are always enveloped by the time. And the time envelops you ever since you have been in the womb. And time continues to be born along with you. And it remains with you till you are gone. So in a sense, there is memory, at the same time there is time. How do we reconcile? Do we reconcile? No, we don't. Because they don't reconcile. Sometimes the time, which has a much greater span, or it claims to have a much greater span than the span of memory. But the human being with the span of memory sometimes thinks that memory can outstretch time. Memory can go beyond time. Memory can perhaps touch areas which are not touched by time. All art, in some way, deals with that. Sometimes you come to that point where you try to explore that deeply complex notion of time and memory that remain with you throughout your life. Now, I'm not a philosopher. I do not know the language of philosophy, but we know that there is cyclical time and there is serial time and there is calendar time and there is other time. The time that comes to my mind at this point is the time of, let us say, taking a step, walking.
Yep.
When you walk, it's one step. It is a one step of a time. And you keep walking all your life. And how many steps do you walk? How many times do you walk? And you will think it would be thousands and millions and millions. But time also means, if somebody were to tell you, and I'll go and give you another metaphor, that it has something to do with the heartbeat. It's like a second, it ticks like a clock. Tick, 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 it goes on. How many heartbeats do you count in a day? Have you ever counted? Somebody has counted and somebody even told me. I remember I went to a temple. Where was it? Either it was Chidambaram or where was it? Yeah, perhaps. And I was told that, this particular temple has all kinds of, actually it is made of stones. I'm not remembering it very clearly, but there are elements in the making of the temple which run into millions. At one calculation, somebody said that they are like heartbeats. So in a way, the whole temple was construed or constructed as though it was replicating the idea of heartbeats. So in a way, you have some presence of, divine being.
You are surrounded by heartbeats.
And you are into that surrounding, where everything is counted as though they are all counted as heartbeats. Now, I won't go further into that because that would lead you into all kinds of areas. But you asked another question. You see, mortality is yet another expression which I think is also born the point when you are born. Because every life is made to be extinguished. Every lamp is lit to be extinguished. So in a sense, it is written, it remains with you. You don't notice it, it's there. You realize it when somebody passes away. In our case, most human beings realize it when somebody of your own age passes away. Like Nasreen was of my own age. Nasreen was born, I think, in 1937. I was born in 1937. She passed away, and I said, oh, life is so fickle now. I realized it much more because 3 years ago, my friend Nagji Patel, who was also of the same age, passed away.
Yeah.
So in a way, mortality begins to chase you.
Yeah.
Mortality doesn't leave you. Mortality, the only way to fight is with memory. Memory can fight literally every other, entity that prevents you from expanding. Memory allows you to continually expand. Memory allows you to even erase mortality. Though mortality doesn't go, but for the time being, it transforms mortality into something else. And you feel that painting or poetry or whatever that you have in your hand, what do you have? You don't have any other. Do you have any transcendental weapon as the divinities of we don't live forever. You also have a limited period of time. But at the same time, you don't give up and you don't fall into the trap of mortality. Mortality lays trap at every juncture. It keeps you from falling. No, it sometimes you stumble, but it is somewhere memory that brings you back. That's why I said that memory is something which can be ever, it's a fecund entity. It can keep on generating more and more memories. So what I'm interested, when I wrote about my own life, in Gujarati called Ghair Jata.
Yes.
I wrote most of the things which I remembered, yes.
Which means
but
returning
at some time
home.
I felt that was not enough. And there I, invoked memory, and I, in fact, even created some. So in a way, life is such which allows you to use these, whatever weapons that come in your hand. And in that sense, you continue going. Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That was beautiful. Also, another thing, about memory and type that you said that I found interesting was the fact that if it can in fact exist outside of you, as some philosophies have claimed, that there is time and consciousness exists not so much within us, but outside of us. And so it continues even after we're gone, in a sense. So that can also be a way of understanding, say, memory, for instance, the way it surrounds us. I wanted to perhaps go back in time now a little bit, and to the time when you arrived in Baroda from Surendranagar in 1955. From that time on, your travels, your itinerary exploded from Surendranagar, where you were born and you grew up, till the time you arrived in Baroda. And from here on, the first trips were as part of the college program, MSU, and then there were the trips made with friends, of which two, of course, are part of the exhibition. The one with there's the one with Bhupen Kakkar in '66 to Chandigarh, and then followed by, of course, the 1970 trip to Fatehpur Sikri. You also made trips with Jyoti Bhatt to fairs and villages, to Chota Udaipur, and another trip with Bhupen again to Jaisalmer. And then onwards to your fantastic journeys in London and Europe. You kind of hinted it at the start. So, I mean, I wanted you to now that we have gone through this idea of memory and time, perhaps now it's only suitable and germane that we arrive at the idea of travels, perhaps. So could you take us through some of these travels, and what is the place? Tell us about what is the place of traveling in your life and in your work.
Let me put it this way. You see, while I was in Surendranagar, I hardly traveled.
Yes.
I had not even gone to as far as a place like Ahmedabad. I don't know whether I even went to Rajkot.
Mm-hmm.
I only went to some odd villages with my relatives for some occasion like a marriage or such things. So when I came to Baroda, it sort of came as a big kind of an opportunity for me to travel. Every year we had what we call study tour. And I remember the very first year I went to Mahabalipuram. And I was absolutely, blown, as you say. I wrote a poem on Mahabalipuram at that point of time. I have written a number of poems on cities, by the way.
Yeah.
Then in the second year, we went to Rajasthan. Third year, we went to Ajanta. Then we went to Karnataka. We went to Ayhole, Pattadakkal. We went to Bhubaneswar. Then we went to, and all 6 years I traveled and went from place to place. And that was because it was subsidized. As students, we could travel with the rest of all the teachers and students, and we all. But that was one kind of a big experience that fine arts gave me.
Yeah.
So it was after that we had heard about Hussain going to Jaisalmer, and Bhupen came to study in Baroda in 1961. He was, for a year, he was my student. But anyway, we both were very good friends before that. And so we decided to visit Jaisalmer. And it was in 1963. And if you were to show those pictures of Jaisalmer now, I think your, audience would be able to. And I can read some of the Jaisalmer poems.
Yes.
Before
that would be
go further, and I will answer your question a little further after I have completed that journey. Shall I?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me read one Gujarati so that you get an idea of the language. This was written in January 1963. I wrote 6 poems there. And this is number 1. It's called Jaisalmer. Maru thale moti madhu a nagar. Ene todle mor ane bhite phare hathi. Jarukhe patthar nu heer bharat. Barye butti tarwarona toran. Sanjana ajwade bhito narangi chundadini dem farfare. Barane lodhana kade 8 pedhina hathno घसरको फड़िए फरे बेचार बकरा श्याम डेली बार बेकार दे कामढू ऊंट वचली वंडिये सुकाए राता चीर अंदर ना ओरडे फुगाई गયેલા अंधारे फर फरे ढीली वाट लाल चटक चूलानी झाड़ અને ચૂંદડીના અજવાળે રોટલા ટીપતી સોનેરી કન્યા. I'll read the translation of this poem and one more. So let me see if I can find that.
if the other poem is as short as well, then I would love to hear it also in Gujarati and English, so that it's just nice to hear, even if I
The
don't
second
follow.
one?
Yeah,
the
both
second
of
one?
them. Yeah, both of them would be nice in Gujarati and English.
Okay. So this one I translated by Salim Piradena and me. In a desert land, this pearl-studded city, peacocks perch on brackets and elephants ramble over walls. Every balcony lace embroidered in stone, every window festooned with gashes of blunt swords. In the twilight, walls flare like orange odinies. 8 generations of hands have smoothened the door's iron ring. Black goats loiter in the courtyard, and beyond the yard door, the dutiful camel bleats. A limp flame flickers in a room's moldy darkness. In the hearth's red flush, in the chundari's glow, chundari is ordinary, similar. In the chundari's glow, a golden girl needs a loaf-shaped city. The second one I'll read in Gujarati. Okay, let me read this one. It's about the city. કોટના કાંગરામાંથી માથું કાઢી નગરી નીચે જોતી હતી. નમણા દેખાય બે બાજુના ઘર અને એથી એ નમણી અડધી પડધી હવેલીઓ વચ્ચેની ગલી જાજરમાન નગરી નીચે તાકી રહી હતી. ત્યારે ઉત્તરેથી ડમરીના ડંકા સાથે ચડી આવ્યા ઊંટ, ભૂખરા કથ્થાઈ તેજીલા ઊંટ વાવાઝોડાની જેમ હવેલીઓને ઘેરી વળ્યા અને જતા જતા કિલ્લાને પોટ પર નાખી નાઠા. અવાચક નગ્ન નગરી બે ઘડી હેબતાઈ ઊભી, પછી નફટ થઈને ડમરીની પૂંઠે ચાલી નીકળી. I'll read the translation. This was also done by Salim and me. I made a rough translation and Salim worked on it. And finally, he prepared a draft and we both worked together and produced this version. This is Jaisalmer 3. Raising its head above the fort, the city was looking earthward. Charming rows of houses, and still more delightful, the lane winding through the ruined mansions. The majestic city was peering down from above. Then came camels trumpeting funnels of dust, gray, brown, swift-footed camels, taking the town as if by storm. And on their way out, hauling away the fort on their backs. Speechless, naked, the city stood outraged, hesitated for a moment, then shamelessly went after the dust spirals. And that is Jaisalmer. What we did was after
Thank you.
Jaisalmer, there is it is the city of Jaisalmer in which there is a Haveli which is called Zalim Singh's Haveli. Anyway, so there are references to that. I have captioned some of these. These photographs were taken at that time, both in black and white and color. And I had got them processed a little later, and I found them recently. But let me also tell you that at a later stage, of 30 years or 40 years later, Vanaraj Bhatia, the famous music composer, came to me and asked me if we could set the Jaisalmer poems to music. I said, yes, why not?
Yeah.
Well, you're such a good musician. I had heard his music.
Yeah.
Anyway, I won't go to. So he sort of made what was called the Paranjoti choir in Bombay with some odd 30, 40 singers to memorize the Gujarati poems, 6 of them. And he set them to music. And he told me, he said, since it is medieval and modern, I would invoke the Gregorian chants and I will set them in that tone. And they performed it in Bombay. I went to listen to it. And I must say, I was fascinated. Finally, he gave me a full recording and I have it somewhere. I wanted to find it, but today I could not lay my hand on it, but I will be able to find sometime, somewhere. And that is Jaisalmer. But Jaisalmer remained in my mind for a very, and it still remains to an extent, because you never forget a city, a place where you have been in your early youth and you have discovered something and you have written a poem, you've written a set of poems. So in a way, it is a kind of a haunting memory. It was a haunting city, by the way. It was uninhabited like Fatehpur Sikri, because in those days, there were droughts after droughts. And Jaisalmer did not get any rains. And in fact, I wrote a poem 5 years later, because I read a news item saying that children did not know, children of 5 who were born during those years, what rain was. Anyway, so Vanraj Bhatia set it to music and there it is. But it was much later. It was after my return from England that we again went to Rajasthan. I went with Bhupen and Chatpar. And then, in 66, both Bhupen and I applied for a job, as I spoke the other day.
Yes.
And then in 70, we went to Fatehpur Sikri. That also I have explained.
Yes.
If there is any question, please let me know.
Could you maybe just take us through a bit of the journeys, the fantastic hitchhiking and the journeys that you undertook while you were in London/Europe? Just a little bit. And then
That's
I know.
Journey. It's a long
it
journey, my dear. But anyway, let me tell you.
A glimpse. Yeah.
You see,
and a question I have is that just to do you think like the silsila of the travels was set into motion
much later
by the early travels that you undertook while you were at MS University, that somehow set the ball rolling on everything that was to come somehow, because it was part of your curriculum somehow, and then after that it somehow seemed to not stop. And I think it was also in MS, right? That while you were also teaching, Jyoti Bhatt would go to because he was documenting the fairs.
That happened later. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
No, my dear, you see, there were far too many narratives at the same time.
Yes.
That the study tours were like what you call India tours. I got an idea of India from those 6 years. 6 places which I visited from north to south and from west to east. That was what was India through art. Its art, its architecture. That is one. Jaisalmer was a personal journey which we conducted on our own.
Yeah.
But fairs and festivals were part of our life. Because I was from Kathiawad also, like Jyoti Bhatt. But I bought my camera around that time, but I did not use much of it. But I remember that Jyoti and others used to go to all the fairs and festivals, and we all went. One of the festivals that we all went to, and Bhupen, Vivan, and I, all of us went, is called Tarnetar, which is near Rajkot. It's a place called Than. Than is actually a place where my mother was born and lived there.
Okay.
So that place, the Tarnetar Trinetra Mahadev, the Mahadev, the Shiva with 3 eyes, was the temple around which there was an annual Mela, which was called Tarnetar, where village folk came from all over Kathiawar, sang and danced and played and had fun. We went there and we photographed. I still have photographs of 1963, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I still have. But Jyoti was doing more concentratedly.
Yeah.
Jyoti and Kaneria. And then they became more and more involved in it while I was abroad. And then later on, they continued their journey throughout, I think, for several decades. But it was in 67, then the state of, or the government of Gujarat gave us a commission to project the village art of India, of Gujarat. So they asked Jyoti, me, and Bhupen.
Achha.
That gave us an opportunity to travel all over Gujarat. We went to various places, but that was not for fairs and festivals. That was to visit places. We went to Kutch, we went to Kathiawar, we went to various places. And I took some photographs, which also I have. It was held in Bombay, that exhibition, small exhibition, not much, because they could not afford to bring much. But anyway, it was, for us, it was a very, what shall you call it? It was a nourishing experience for all 3 of us traveling and living together for a period of time. That's what. Whereas Fatehpur Sikri came later, but that was also a time when we were all, actually, it coincided a graphic workshop, printmaking. I have said that here, yes. Printmaking workshop. And that provided us with an opportunity to visit Fatehpur Sikri, which I had longed to visit for many years. I had not been to. And so Nilima, my love at that time, her father gave his driver, Nandalal, and we all embarked upon that. And there I took photographs.
Your love even now.
Yes, of course. Anyway, so what more?
Okay. Abhi, I mean, despite all the travels, once you moved to Baroda.
Okay, I was telling you about traveling back from.
Yeah. Well, the bit about like the hitchhike, it's fantastic. I mean, you have to.
I don't know whether our audience is.
You shouldn't worry too much about the audience. I'm your audience. I want to listen.
You see, I traveled while I was in England for 3 years. Every holiday, even in Christmas, I went to Paris or somewhere nearby. I saw more of Europe than of England. So I traveled in Italy, right up to Spain, to Germany, France, whatnot, as many things as I could. Italy, I went several times. So when I was returning, I thought of going back by road. How do I go back by road? I had no money. I had only a small scholarship, which Commonwealth Scholarship Commission gave me, something like £56 a month. But I had saved some pounds, put them in my pocket, and I thought I will venture onto this kind of a journey. So I packed I went and bought what you call cabin trunk, big trunk, and put all my stuff there, gave it to Thomas and Cook. And I said, please send it to this address. And I had a duffel bag with one pair of clothing, just my camera and nothing else, just perhaps a towel. And I embarked upon. I went to Paris first stop. From Paris, I went right down by train to Milan. From Milan, I went right, travel, if you can, you know the geography. Milan is right at the top. I went up to Bari, Brindisi. Bari, a friend of mine called Pradyumna Tanna had lived there, but unfortunately he was not there. From Bari, that is beyond Naples.
Okay.
Right down south.
So far south, yeah.
Right down south. From Naples, from Bari. From Bari I went to Brindisi. From Brindisi I took a boat and went to Greece via Crete and landed in Athens and saw all those wonderful icons and those fantastic, obviously, the great architecture of Parthenon and everything else. And then I embarked upon a journey on a train. From there, I went to Yugoslavia. I didn't stop there, but I went past Sarajevo and I came to Istanbul. And another city which stops my heart. Istanbul is the city where I would like to live sometime, if I can, in this life, if I can. Yeah. And I saw it and I fell in love with it. Not just because of its mosque, but because of the chaos. It is something like India, but very different kind of India. And it was so different that I was fascinated. And it was on the seaside. And as you know, I will not go into. From Istanbul, I went to Ankara. And Ankara is a fascinating city. It's like California. Perhaps, you know San Francisco. It's on a high hills. And so you have the cars literally, running down the hill. That kind of very scary. But it has fantastic museums. There is that great sculpture of Sappho. There is that grave of Alexander and whatnot. And then I said, okay, where do I go from? From Erzurum, I took another train and I reached the border of Syria. Then when I reached the border of Syria, I had to take another train to Iraq. So Syria, I went via Aleppo and all that. There was one small instance I will tell you, just to illustrate my little story. That on a train which was passing through a desert land, which was a ramshackle train, all open doors and everything. And it was hot like hell. Suddenly at a station, everybody got down and I saw what was happening. And when I saw that everybody was coming down to buy watermelons. That place was known for its watermelons. And then when I saw that whole train was eating watermelons, I also had a little piece. That's how but when I reached the border of Iraq, the guard stopped me. They said, you can't go further. I said, why? They said, there is epidemic. And you haven't got inoculated. I said, no, nobody told me to inoculation. I traveled from London and come here all the way, blah, blah, blah. They won't understand me because they only spoke Arabic. So I looked around. Finally, I found a gentleman who spoke English. I said, please explain. He said, look, it is not epidemic, it's money. I said, what? He said, you have $20. Just hand them over. I said, my dear, I don't have $20. I must have about 5. Then I looked at the gentleman. I said, look, dear friend, I'm going to Basra. Where are you going? He said, I'm also going to Basra. I said, look, we are both going to Basra. The moment I land in Basra, I go to a bank, I check my traveler's check and I'll pay you your $20. Will you lend them to me to get over this? He gave me, and that is how I got on a bus, which was again a ramshackle bus, all kakad. Whole night, next day in Basra, I gave him the money, and then I took the India steam navigation ship to Bombay.
Yeah.
And there I met, well, let me tell you one little story. The gentleman who lent me $20 told me that he had lived in Iraq for all his life, and his family and his ancestors had all lived in Iraq, and he was a Jewish man. So I say, oh, I'm very happy to hear that. And then he told me that this was 1966, remember? He said, but do you know that there is going to be a great war here? He said, war? I have not heard of this. He said, no, there is going to be a war on Palestine. Have you heard of it? I said, yes, I know the name, but I do not know. And he said, it's picking up in this part of the country. And I do not know what will happen to us when the war takes. So I heard about Palestinian war taking place or just happening there by this man. And when I was on the Sindhia boat, I met a young Sri Lankan student who was also returning from England. And you know what he told me? He said, you don't know what is happening to Sri Lanka. I said, what is happening to Sri Lanka? I'm going to India, but I know Sri Lanka. So he says, Sri Lanka, there is also going to be a war by the Tamilians. So LTPE, the seeds were already sown. So I heard these stories of wars while I landed in Bombay.
Wait,
so my story.
Which year did you land in Bombay then?
1966, August or September. Yes. I traveled from July to August. I think it must have been July, August, September. Yeah, September. I landed in September. And then between September and December, Bhupen and I traveled. And I have to put my phone on a battery. So I will do that right now.
Yeah,
my phone is, but I think I have got a charger here. So let me do it. But are we going past our time?
I mean, yes, a little bit, but I don't really actually have lost track of time. But we have just made, I mean, with all that talk about time, it's only fair to lose track of it.
So is there any further, or do you want me to speak on? Or
I wanted you to kind of maybe the last few things, I wanted you to talk about while you were on these travels, especially while you were in Europe. You wrote back letters that were published in little magazines, and journals.
Not little magazines, proper magazines.
Okay, proper magazines. Proper magazines and journals that were being published in Baroda at the time under the watchful eye of Suresh Joshi, who you consider your mentor.
Yeah.
And so, the 50s and the 60s were a very compelling time in Baroda, and also then the 70s were a very compelling time in Baroda, and you found yourself in the thick of it. Could you tell us a bit about the together of the literary arts and the visual arts that was happening then, and how did this affect your writing and your painting? And I know too many questions. And the role of Suresh Joshi in all of this somehow. I know that it's also a centenary year.
Well, for my being there as a young artist writer in the 1950s and 60s, I can put it like this. I using an expression from Shamsur Rahman Farooqi. There were many a moon in that firmament, and as many satellites. And we were all moving around. So my teachers in the Faculty of Fine Arts and mentors like Suresh Joshi, from whom I learned a great deal, were the immediate influences. Suresh Joshi opened doors to world poetry. In fact, I first learned about what good or great poetry can be by reading the books that he gave me. I read Lorca, I read Rilke, I read Neruda, I read Paz, and whatnot. We had a literary meet in Baroda for almost 4 or 5 years at the residence of Bhogilal Gandhi, where I was a paying guest after I finished my studies. Every Saturday for 3 to 4 hours, we all sat and Suresh Bhai brought these books of poems and he read them. And our minds were blown, absolutely blown. No, we had never come across such poetry, such literature. And so all that I had written in Surendranagar and published, I packed it in a bag and put it away on a shelf, which I did not open until about 50 years later. So when I embarked upon an entirely different journey, guided by this. This is the journal called Kshitij.
Yes.
Kshitij means horizon. And Kshitij, I became a kind of an art editor and got every time an artist to do a cover. And we printed it by hand printed linoleum block and in the letterpress. So they were all original prints. And that we did at least until I was there, 1963. And but that's what it is. What do I say about that? Well, Suresh Joshi was a major
Sure.
figure.
Yeah.
And he literally brought me. I mean, he even would give me a book of Lorca and he would say, look here, that has this original Spanish. Why don't you also try to read original Spanish? And look at this young man. I must have been, 25, 26?
Yeah.
And I would pick up a Spanish text and I'll start memorizing it. I would pick up a Rilke poem and try to memorize. It was such a wonderful experience that poetry went very deep. And I still continue to harbor it and I want to retain it. I think there is something very special, very deeply nourishing that I got during that period of time because of my association with. But look, I did not imitate. He said, don't imitate. Don't write like anybody. Write what you want to write. He would not even say it, but he had shown it with his own example. And so I did find images which were, today if you read them, you can see that some images have reference to Baudelaire or some other poets. But those were the images which came to me almost, how do you say that, spontaneously, and I internalized them. And that is where I began to break from writing songs, writing metered poetry, and embarked upon doing something which was totally meterless. And it was a free form of poetry, which I began in late 50s. And now I mix everything. But anyway, I continued for a long period of time.
I've been told that we have to rush. There are a couple of questions from the audience, but I have quite a few myself. But I just, in the interest of those who are still watching, I just wanted to mention that as part of the exhibition, we have an Piyush Thakkar, who's a sort of a poet and an artist, and also teaches at Ahmed University. He has, and the images that you have just saw, maybe Rachita can bring them back on. Those are part of the archive called Janantike, which he has curated, which contain a lot of a lot of poetry, covers done by artists for the magazines that Suresh Joshi brought out, in particular Kshitij and Ohapo. And there are letters that were written by artists back to Gulam's letters are there. And there are also artists, the jackets that artists have made for his book. So there's a lot as part of the exhibition that we have also shown. Okay. Just, I don't know what to ask. I have a few questions, but I just want to maybe skip, because I would like you to perhaps read from this. I want to bring up this article that you have. Sorry, just one.
It's a memoir, yeah, on Nasreen.
I mean, just if you can, read from that, and I just want to by the time you look.
This I won't translate. I will read. It is in Hindi. It's already been translated.
Yeah, Hindi is fine. So basically,
so here I have selected a paragraph. If you like, I will read that.
Okay, yeah.
This is about Nasreen. चित्र में पहले से ही रंग को बाहर रखा था. सफेद कैनवास पर काले तैल रंग बहाती. तुलिका या रोलर से पतले या गहरे आवर्तन खड़े करती. कुछ चपटा बना देती. बीच बीच में तुलिका को सुखाकर या कपड़े से रंग उठा लेती. कभी उसमें छोटे त्रिकोण और समकोण जोड़ देती. एक तारी संगीत या तबले की धनक जैसा सब कुछ एक सुर से, एक सूत्र से बंधा हुआ. आकारों का संगीत की तरह ही दिखाई देने वाली दुनिया की किसी आकृति के साथ सीधा संबंध नहीं, लेकिन हर एक पदार्थ के अंदर बसने वाले चलित जीवित तत्व की खनक नजर आती और प्रकृति के अंदर के गोपित जीवों की धड़कनें भी सुनाई देती. जिस तरह परछाइयां हल्के फुल्के कोट अनकोट रंग से धूल पर, रेत पर, खिड़की दरवाजों, पेड़ पर चढ़ती, लौटती और सृष्टि को पलटा देती है, या लोगों की पदचाल या हवा के जोर पर हर रोज के रास्ते का पट अनोखा रूप धारण करके हैरत पैदा करता है. यह रात्रि के अंधेरे में दो घर, पेड़ या गली के खंभों के बीच का कोरा आकाश कुदरत की अगम लीला का ऐलान करता हो, ऐसे ही उसके चित्रों में एक अनूठी उत्कट आत्मीय अनुभूति को परखे बिना नहीं रहती. बाहर आकर आंखों के छूने पर भी लजा जाती हो, पास जाकर धीरे से खोजने पर उभरती. कई बार परछाई में बाल या पानी में कांच ढूंढने जैसा. कभी बहती हवा या पाताल झरने की गतिमयता के सिर्फ एहसास. ये नसरीन के चित्रों के बारे.
Thank you so much, Gulam. Can you just maybe tell us when this was, just a bit of context, and then I will pose a question to you that's coming from the audience.
This was what?
Iska context. I mean, this was first published in Gujarati.
1990.
1990, right? And now what Gulam has read is instead, it's a great timing that the Hindi piece, the translation has just appeared in a magazine called Katha.
No, in a book. And it has appeared in a magazine. Yeah, you are right. You are right. Katha I sent you the magazine.
Yeah. 2021, abhi March 2021. Thank you so much, Gulam. I'm going to now ask a question. Unfortunately, I have quite a few, but I'm going to ask you a question from the audience. And so how do you, sir, use to decide the personal tours and sites all seem cultural or history relevant and not like generation of today's time, which is trying to go away from the city, Himachal, Goa or Dubai, something exotic? What is your view on this?
I have not fully understood. Please.
Yeah. Let me just try and read this once, and then let me see if I can tease some meaning.
Yeah. Okay. Can you read it again and tell me, or tell the person?
I'll read it for sake, buddy. So I think basically they're trying to say is, how did you decide on these journeys that you make, which are somehow always seem sort of culturally and historically relevant, as opposed to the youth of today, which is always looking to just sort of get away to sort of on in holiday mode to places like Goa or Dubai. I think that's the question. What's your view on that? As in your sophisticated choice making with regard to sites, and some of the less, perhaps according to the asker of the question, less perhaps sophisticated choice making of some youth of today.
Well, if it is a question of a choice of a place, then it's all quite spontaneous. Sometimes, it just happens. It occurs to you that why not? Let's go and see this place. So it's like I'm always ready to move and wander around. I like to wander around to see places which I have not been to.
Yeah.
But also another thing which I may add is that in the earlier days, I used to walk a lot. And even in Europe, I walked a lot. I'd like to know places literally by walking. So did you know the place? And once you have walked the street, you never forget it,
Yeah.
So for instance, in the city of Paris, I walked so much that I used to know. I remember once when I went there and I wanted to go and see Akbar Padamsi and Raza, which I did, but I walked all the way, from the center of the city to their places. And I love this thing because then I can see life unfolding in front of me. And I know that places, which, give you so much. And I still have that curiosity. I still want to. In Baroda, I have walked I used to walk even in the city.
Yeah.
Until very recently, and it's a great fun also, to be lost in the crowd, to see the humanity, are surrounding you. And you find all kinds of people, all types of people, all kinds of situations, good, bad, indifferent, sometimes violent, etc. But you face it, you see it, you are right in the middle of. I remember when our children were growing, I used to take them to Ganesh Chaturthi pandals, and when there were the what you call, जो उसके वो निकलते हैं ना, सरगस निकलते हैं सब लोग बाजार में, मुहर्रम का ताजिया निकलता है, वो भी देखने ले जाता था, गणेश चतुर्थी के ले जा, ये सब कुछ, it's so much part of our life, it's something which we never recognized, we never realized that, that chaos is something which is built into your very, very genes. Your genes have those sort of, multiple diverse forces, which are constantly at work on you. But when you are in the crowd, then you realize. And I think that one thing that defines India in some way is a sense of the crowd.
The sense of the?
Sense of the crowd.
Crowd.
Good, bad, or whatever. I'm not making a judgment, political or otherwise.
Yeah.
But there is something about people gathering, not just for religious purposes, but all kinds of purposes, political rally, all kinds of things. And among in the Indian painting, the Mughal painting, especially Akbari painting, is the only painting I would say that the tradition of painting, which deals with crowds. So many of Akbarnama paintings deal with, crowds, and there is something about it. No, we've very few. Well, I'm quite.
Well, seems kind of sort of almost sad then to think about Fatehpur Sikri as as a deserted ghost city, his capital, Akbar's capital. There is a question that has come through, which is actually somehow also related to a question I had, which I had to refrain from asking because of time. Let me just ask this one. Could you speak a little more on camaraderie and the synergies that emerge from it, especially in the way it leads to newer, perhaps also experimental vocabularies?
Experimental vocabularies.
Yes, I think it's also somehow perhaps related to again the kind of coming together that happened in the 50s and the 60s. There was a lot of energies that came together. So I think if you can reflect on it from that lens as to what kind of vocabularies emerged, were there anything perhaps, as this person has asked, experimental vocabularies?
Well, I do not know exactly how to answer the question, but if it is meant to unravel something of the coming together of or meeting of minds, let's say of 1890 in the 1960s, from all over India, and not just forming a group, but also in a way a kind of testing one's own with the other. And how do we all, gel together, or how do we stand together, and which would generate an energy. And in a way, I think if at all, if 1890 can be remembered, it can be remembered for that kind of an energy that it generated. And it also gave idea of a kind of a mini notion of India, that we had artists from all over, as many as possible. And that we grappled with, not always not successful, but it's always meeting of minds, is something fascinating. It happened continually in the 70s again with Vivan Sundaram and others. We had series of exhibitions, partly because of the reality that we could not afford singular solo shows, but that we got together several times,
Yeah.
And then there were graphic workshops where people got together. Then there were these artists coming together, and there are these artist camps and all these things. So if that is the question, then yes, there was some degree of, energy which was generated by, and all generations, because you see, our camps were very different from any camps which took place elsewhere, because in India, you had 3 to 4 generations of artists functioning simultaneously, and literally in some of the so-called camps, they all, communicated with each other.
Yeah.
If that is, I don't know whether I have answered the question, but anyway.
Yeah.
What more?
I have 2 more questions that have come in from anonymous attendees. The first one is, dear sir, loved hearing your stories. Writing this in a rush. Could you please tell us how your practice has changed over the years? A comparison maybe between what you focused on in your earlier works as compared to now. How has it evolved?
How can I
from horses?
how can I put it in a synoptic manner? All those silly experiments, all those things that I have done,
yes,
I played with. It's very difficult to, but I have moved from point to point. Yes, I have experimented. I've tried different media. I've tried different themes. I've tried to respond to what was happening around me, what was political, what was social, what was, all kinds of things. And also, of course, poetic and other. So try to, but it's never literal, It's, you see, the thing is that at one period of time, you do one thing. Yes, true. Because like in the 1960s, I painted, in oils, sort of tongas and horses. And yes, true. In 1960s, later, I painted trees. I went on tree after tree after tree. So many of them. Then I went and painted some kind of.
Why? I just want to ask something about the trees. What was it that? Why were you drawn to the trees? Because I've also read this and in various contexts, as the reappearance of trees in your work at a particular point of time. What was the reason behind this, or what was the thought?
But tree has always attracted me, and I still continue to use the image of the tree. But when I returned from England, I traveled a lot. As I said, I went to Rajasthan and all that. But once I remember, I went to Madhya Pradesh. I was somewhere near Jhansi, and I was in a bus. And when I saw, sitting in the bus, you have all the forest and trees and hills and etc. coming. Suddenly you find that suddenly a tree rises above you. Suddenly you find that the hill is taken over by a tree. And it fascinated me. I said, could I use it? How do I use it? So tree became a kind of a presence of some kind of a elemental force, that made it grow from the ground and sort of, come out in a kind of a, sometimes even in an explosive manner, but this is how it was growing. That kind of an energy, flowing and coming out. So I went on making tree, and in fact, what happened is that I wanted to paint the sunlight. I wanted to paint noontime. Most of it was noontime, something like Fatehpur Sikri. But anyway, it was, in my experience of life, in whatever I have seen, the most crucial time in our life is the midday. In the midday, there is that kind of a light which sometimes becomes very mysterious. It sometimes makes things like mirage. Sometimes it makes it so so clear that it begins to prick your skin. And at times the heat takes over you, and you realize that there is a relation between the body heat and the heat outside. And there is a kind of a relationship between the physical and that kind of environmental that works upon you. And a new energy is generated through it. So I use lemon yellow a lot. I use chrome yellow and lemon yellow. I mixed them up, and I went on painting trees during that time. I had a couple of exhibitions of that.
There are, Gulam, I think we have to really rush through some of this because there are, I mean, at least if you can touch on, because there are lots of questions coming in. So
I'm prepared to sit, provided you are not fed up.
Well, I'm also okay. So let's try and at least touch on all of these questions. So travel, memory, history, how have these been portrayed and changed in working in the last year? A time where we all have started going back in time, where memories have taken over real time.
Quite true, quite true. What has happened is unprecedented. One had never ever thought that the whole world would be taken over by pandemic or an illness, which would plague us all. And that we would be housebound, that we will not be able to move around. Somebody with a kind of a, what you call, chakkar in your heels, as I have, it's a hard time, to be sitting around and not going about. but it is. So, but one deals with it. You see, there is no situation that you can't deal with. You see, if it's like being in a prison. But if you are in a prison, you find a way to deal with your being incarcerated. How do you deal yourself being alone? Loneliness is something, which is also very, I think, it is something also you live with it, because right from your childhood, you have learned to be yourself. And in a way, loneliness is also part of your makeup, or your life. So when loneliness comes, you may make perhaps something out of it, if you can. Some of the best and the most moving poems are written by people who were very lonely. The poets wrote about their loneliness, either because of the disease, either because of incarceration, or because they were just suffering. Suppose if you take the image of Proust, French poet, who was suffering from acute lung disease. He was asthmatic.
Okay.
So asthmatic, he could not sit up, stand up. And he just had to be in a position where he could just stay still. And he remained still. And he wrote about it. Now, if you remain still and you have nothing else to look, and you look at outside, and a leaf falls from a tree, and he traces the movement of the leaf leaving the tree and reaching the ground. And there he creates the space, and in a way, a kind of a space of time, which very few poets have done. But something like that, which in a way, it doesn't become loneliness. It's not something, which is something which can make you feel lost. But you may also perhaps find some aspect of that, which may nourish both your soul or your memory. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but that has happened to us. Many of us, we are sitting at home, but I keep working. I'm still writing. I'm still painting. I sit at home and do that. I can't go to my big studio, but I still have my time. I still have my paper. I still have my hands. I still have my head. I still have my memory. And I still have my body. या गटे भीतर सूर्य चंद है सब कुछ है क्यों नहीं?
Yeah.
I also.
There is another question. It's amongst your contemporaries. Amongst your contemporaries, whose works, practice, style fascinated you personally, and why? It can be more than one, of course.
Yeah, many. Well, Bhupen fascinated me.
Yeah.
No, he was most, not only intriguing, but he was enticing. It's something which made you feel as though how he, made those whatever paintings that he did. And I tell you how I saw his work. There is a painting which I greatly admired, which I actually wanted to buy, but unfortunately it was sold. He painted a bunch of ironed clothes, shirts actually. Now, who would paint a bunch of shirts, which are ironed sharply, into its collars and its. There is something about the hand of the man who has ironed, man or a woman, whoever that is, somebody who has brought some warmth into that clothing. Bhupen somehow, very intriguingly, painting and painting over and over, was able to make things, animate, make things, come alive, in a way. You would bring out something which was in an inanimate object, something which was most, what shall we say, energetic, lively, etc. He did get. So Bhupen was one of those artists who fascinated me. Nasreen fascinated me. Nilima fascinates me. And there are several artists. Even Vivan Sundaram I look at very carefully. I look at Atul Daudia very, though he's not my contemporary, but I look at his work very carefully. I'm interested in old discourses, old dialogues, and I get sometimes involved in things which I don't do. Partially it is because I don't do them. Maybe there is something within me which tells me that, look, you have not done this, but somebody else is doing this. And I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in that other, which is not part of my makeup. But there is something which exists outside, but which perhaps fulfills some part of my, some other that I am seeking.
That you have the temperament of an artist. Yes.
I don't know. I have some temperament. Yes.
Yes. So I have a question that's come in too, but I'm going to pose this one first. It says, in your time, your early days, at a time before Geeta Kapoor, before the curators developed artists, organized and curated shows too. Sorry, let me just break that. In your time, your early days, at a time before Geeta Kapoor, before the curators developed, artists organized and curated shows too, as camaraderie or otherwise. It was more fluid then. Could you talk about the role of the artist as a curator, maybe with a reference of a show?
Well, I would say 1890 was such a show.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't see it, but it was all conducted by artists.
Right.
Entirely. It was all and I bet they hung all the works. They also displayed all the work, and they saw, how they would work together. And so, but I don't know whether I have many other references of that kind. But anyway, many artists have been curators, so there's nothing unusual about it.
You have also curated, at least the.
Yeah. I have curated several shows.
Yes. Maybe just in relation, if you can perhaps briefly talk about your experience, your curatorial experience, and then maybe we can go on to the last question which I have, which is a very brief one.
My curatorial experiences were partially related to what I thought was worth doing, that was not being done, and hence, who else but I should do it myself. So, for instance, if I thought of new contemporaries, I thought that at that point of time, there were many young artists working on the scene. And I thought that there was something, some new energy which was being created by their work. And if I were to bring this together, I would be able to sort of, maybe they will all together would generate another energy. And that would perhaps lead to further changes, etc. So when I chose these artists, like I chose Lakshma God, I chose Yogen Chaudhary, I chose Giv Patel, I put all these artists together, 10 or 12 artists together, and this was in the late 70s. I think it was 79, if I'm not mistaken, and Marg came forward to support it. Marg even produced a very fine illustrated catalog with my essay on it. And we held it in the Jahangir Art Gallery.
Right.
And, big gallery, not the small one. And you would not imagine that at that point of time, the big Ganesh image, sort of a semi-nude Ganesh that Yogen Chaudhary had made, was right there in the beginning as you entered the gallery. And there was not a murmur of protest against it at that point of time.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see how things were changing.
Yeah.
Things were happening. And yet we took the risk and we did that. But but luckily, that. So, and in a way, what I was interested in, each artist, to my mind, represented one point of energy. And that if each one sort of exerted it upon the other, there would be some kind of a, and it did happen. Actually, when you saw it together, you realize that so many things came out of it. And most of these artists are still working today, you can imagine. But that was a point of time. So in a way, it was topical. It was related to the time because I thought that this was important to do it at this point of time. And hence I did that. So that exhibition called Home Street Shrine Bazaar Museum, which I did from the Manchester Art Gallery, was the express purpose of putting Indian art together, but not, as you know, that I tried to combine both the popular as well as the rural folk and tribal together. There were many more artists in that category than the urban, but they were urban, contemporary, urban, rural, and all kinds of, craft-like things, which were also put part of it. But the main purpose was that it was not a single exhibition. Alongside that exhibition, there was an exhibition of contemporary Pakistani art. There was the contemporary art of Bangladesh. And there was the contemporary art of Sri Lanka. All 4 exhibitions were being curated by 4 different curators. I was curating India. Salima Hashmi was doing Pakistan. Sharmini Pereira was doing Sri Lanka. Somebody, forget the name, but somebody was doing the Bangladesh. And I said, when would it ever happen in India when all these 4 countries would show together on a single platform? So this is what could happen only, it could happen only somewhere abroad. And it happened in England in different towns, interestingly. And there were 4 openings of that exhibition.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the political aspect of such an exhibition was never understood, never even acknowledged, that how we put together, all these 4 countries, some of them were at war with each other, but at the same time, these artists from these regions came together and they were all celebrating in some way what was being produced in the 4 different countries. We were all there. We all met them all.
Yeah.
They all came there, Sri Lankan, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and other. So that's the reason why I took upon myself the job of curating such a show.
Yeah. There is one question. Just you mentioned. It says you mentioned camps, residencies. Could you share your most memorable ones?
Well,
Gulam, if you can perhaps tilt your camera in your phone a little, in maybe.
Okay, so my phone has it. Now I can take it in my hand and I can see myself. Well, among the, it's very difficult to choose one upon the other, but I'll tell you that the Kasoli camps were very, 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 very thoughtful, and that they provided food for thought, and also, in a way, in many ways, it opened many avenues, because these camps were not limited to quote unquote artists alone. There were writers, there were filmmakers, there were theater people, there were all kinds of people, who gathered there. And then each one spoke and we learned about them and we communicated with each other. And we lived together for something like 3 weeks or more. Some of them even tried to make carpets. Some of them even tried to, draw things and all that. But the most memorable, if you say residency, it is the Civitella residency in Italy.
Yeah.
Where it is an old medieval fortress in which, you have these small rooms or house, in which you are put up. But beautiful old houses, with all beautiful, everything is maintained as it was, but with all modern amenities. And they do not require anything. They do not expect you. They may have any expectation except that they want to help you. If you need anything, no artist is expected to do this or do that, give them anything. No payment is required. It is all a selection which is made by a committee, and that committee, then you stay with them for 1.5 months, almost 6 weeks. You get to know so many people. Then I remember that I met a Palestinian poet. I met a jazz musician. I met somebody, who was both a painter and somebody who had architectural background. There were so many of them, like Penny Siopis, the Australian artist who made small videos.
Mm-hmm.
And we all got to know each other so well. And in a way, I have still continued having dialogue with 1 or 2 of them. I wish I had continued with most of them, but that was not possible.
Yeah.
But I think it still remains, in my mind as a very, very nourishing experience.
Yes, I think residencies, when they come together well, can be truly nourishing experiences. I can also say that from my own experience. I think let me see. I think we have, that's it. Those are the questions from the audience. Maybe I have one last, I have quite a few. It's unfortunate that I can't go through them. But one last thing before we go, I was just wondering, we've spoken a lot about memory, and that's also very much part of the exhibition. But another thing that's part of the exhibition, and that's also somehow on my mind, is how does one make room for being in the moment, and for a certain mindfulness in relation to memory? How does one deal with these two, the memory and the experiencing of the moment in which one is? How do you understand the tension between these two?
No, I've said it somewhere that we live in multiple times. There is never a singular time ever, whether it is contemporary, present, or whatever.
Mm.
In every second of your life, you continue to move. Your mind keeps moving, or that other aspects of what is there around you works upon you, and it makes its presence felt. I remember, and I may tell you, you may also remember that even while talking to me and asking me this question, it is possible that while putting your hand on your face, you might remember something which I do not know about. You know that such things do happen, constantly happen. We do not play, we do not emphasize upon them. We do not make a big thing about it. But moments keep moving, in which you find a wave. And in the wave, you see that there is a point at which you think that you are here. Yes, you are here, but you are here in the wave. You are not here in a stilled moment. There is no stilled moment. Where is the stilled moment? Where it is? Our mind is never still. Mind doesn't remain still. Mind keeps not only even if it is nothing, it goes on excavating the past. It does something even right in front of you. If you are watching even a movie, your mind goes back to some place where you had been. I don't know how many layers or levels of memory that you constantly live with all the time. So I do not know what is the present moment. Present moment is a moment of being in a flow, being in a wave, part of whatever that is. For want of better word, I'm using the word wave. I'm just saying that a lot of things are happening around us, within which we find ourselves. As we find our body, we find that this body is here at this moment of time, and hence I am here at this moment. Am I making sense?
Yes, yes. And thank you for being here in this moment. And this was I know that you're interested in more than interested in jazz. This was a great session of what I would call controlled improvisation. Thank you so much, Gulam, for doing this and for being generous and open to the possibility of this exhibition. And I hope that we continue to speak with each other. The exhibition is on still for some time, so maybe our paths will cross in Baroda, hopefully.
I'll go and see the exhibition again. I've been wanting to.
And maybe when I'm back in Baroda, we can see it once together before it closes.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, Gulam. Thank you so much. Good night. Good night. And thank you.
I hope it was worth it. Anyway.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Bye.
And thank you to everyone for being with us this evening. And we will see you for the next happening, and the announcements for that will go out when they go out. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you
Bye,
for your patience.
Thank you, Sheikh sir and Gitanjali, for this conversation. Was actually really nourishing and insightful. It was
too long,
good host.
Too long and overstretched. Anyway.
No, it was truly an honor that we could, like the anecdotes you mentioned, it was like even very insightful for us. And we will also be uploading a recording of this. And I would also like to thank all our attendees who joined us.
Yeah, if you could give me the link, then I can ask my friends.
Sure. We'll upload the recording soon and it will be available.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Take care.
Bye.